Now let's review the main anatomical features of the heart. I'm sure you well remember that the heart has a base, the apex, sternal surface, diaphragmatic surface, and two pulmonary surfaces. The right border of the heart is made by the right atrium, and particularly by the superior and inferior vena cava above and below it. The left border is made by the left ventricle, as well as the apex of the heart and the large extent of the diaphragmatic surface. The base of the heart is primarily composed of the left atrium. We also have some grooves here, such as the coronary groove and anterior and posterior interventricular. The superior and inferior vena cava enter the right atrium. The pulmonary trunk begins from the right ventricle. 4 pulmonary veins enter the left atrium, and the aorta begins from the left ventricle. Now we'll add something new to what you've already known. The heart has its own fibrous skeleton. Yes, you hear that right, the skeleton. The muscular fibers and valves of the heart attach to the fibrous rings that constitute a dense fibrous skeleton of the heart. There are 4 fibrous rings. The left fibrous ring, which rims the left atrioventricular orifice. The right fibrous ring, which rims the right atrioventricular orifice. And additionally, we have the fibrous ring around the opening of the pulmonary trunk, and similar one around the aortic opening. The left fibrous ring fuses with the aortic ring to give rise to 2 left and right fibrous trigones situated posterior to the aorta. The rings and trigones separate the atrial myocardium from the ventricular one, serving as an electric isolation between the atria and ventricles. The atrioventricular bundle is the only physiological connection between them. The atrial myocardium arises from the fibrous rings and features 2 layers, the superficial layer and the deep one. The superficial layer, shared by atriums, features transverse muscular fibers. In the deep layer, the fibers are longitudinal and circular. The longitudinal fibers enfold each atrium separately and form sphincters around venous openings. They also give rise to musculi pectinati, parallel ridges in the wall of the atria of the heart. The ventricular myocardium is thicker than that of atriums. The left ventricle has the thickest muscular layer, about 1.5 centimeters. The right ventricular wall is somewhat thinner, about 7 to 8 millimeters. The ventricular myocardium comprises complex system of interlaced and looping fibers arranged in 3 layers. The external oblique layer arises from the anterior portion of each fibrous ring. It runs slantwise inferiorly and leftwards to reach the apex. On reaching the apex, the fibers loop to form the vertex of the heart and become continuous with the internal longitudinal layer. The longitudinal layer gives rise to the trabecular corner and the papillary muscles. Both layers are shared by ventricles. The middle layer comprises transverse fibers that enfold each ventricle separately. This layer is the strongest one. Continuous changing of fibers direction provides more effective force application. Now let's review the internal features of the chambers of the heart, one by one. Starting from the right atrium. This one is an elongated chamber between the superior and inferior vena cava. It has a prolongation, the right auricle, projecting out anterior to the aorta. The internal surface of the right atrium is featured by the pectinate muscles and fossa ovalis. The pectinate muscles are the small muscles situated next to the right auricle and to the right wall of the atrium. The rest of the internal surface of the right atrium is smooth. The smooth and rough parts of the atrial wall are separated by a shallow vertical groove called the sulcus terminalis, and internally by a vertical ridge, the crista terminalis, or terminal crest. The fossa ovalis is a central excavation of the intraatrial septum, and the floor of the fossa is made up of thin endocardial duplication. The fossa is ringed with the limbus fossa ovalis. In embryo, this area features wide opening, the foramen ovale, that communicates the atria. Shortly after delivery, the foramen closes. The veins that open into the right atrium are the superior vena cava and inferior vena cava. The last one has its own valve, right here. The coronary sinus is the venous collector that drains the cardiac walls. Its opening found in between the atrioventricular orifice and the opening of the inferior vena cava. It is rimmed with a small fold called the valve of coronary sinus. The two nodes of the conducting system of the heart, the sinoatrial and atrioventricular nodes, both are located within the walls of the right atrium. The sinoatrial node lies in the upper part of the chamber, next to the opening of the superior vena cava. The area of localization of the atrioventricular node has a special name, the Koch's triangle, and is delineated by the valve of the inferior vena cava, the attachment of the septal cusp of the tricuspid valve, and by the opening of the coronary sinus, by these three structures. The right ventricle forms the largest part of the anterior surface of the heart, a small part of the diaphragmatic surface, and almost the entire inferior border of the heart. Superiorly, the ventricular cavity communicates with the right atrium via wide right atrioventricular orifice. Anteriorly, the ventricle is continuous with the pulmonary trunk via the conus arteriosus. The papillary muscles are the conic muscular projections on the internal surface of ventricle. The right ventricle features the following muscles: the anterior papillary muscle, which is the greatest one in the group. It attaches to the anterior and posterior valve cusps by means of chorda tendinea. The posterior papillary muscle, somewhat smaller in diameter, and it attaches to the anterior and posterior cups as well. The septal papillary muscle appears as a group of small muscular projections that attach to the septal and the anterior cusps. The internal surface of the ventricle features numerous trabecular columnar that form the networks. The anterosuperior portion of the ventricle with smooth walls is called conus arteriosus. It narrows and becomes continuous with the pulmonary trunk. Its opening, the opening of pulmonary trunk, features the same named valve, as you know. The left atrium forms most of the base of the heart. Its cavity is of irregular cubic shape, and it accepts 4 pulmonary veins, 2 from each lung. The fossa ovalis is visible from the cavity of the left atrium too. The left ventricle has a cone-shaped cavity with 2 openings in it. The left atrioventricular orifice and the aortic orifice. The interior of the left ventricle has walls that are 2 to 3 times as thick as those in the right ventricle, walls that are mostly covered with a mesh of trabecular corner that are finer and more numerous than those in the right ventricle, a conic cavity that is longer than in the right ventricle, anterior and posterior papillary muscles that are larger than those in the right ventricle, a smooth, walled, non-muscular supra-anterior outflow part, the aortic vestibule, leading to the aortic orifice and aortic valve. And it has a double leaflet mitral valve that guards the AV orifice.